up, everyone? It's Sam Shaw here. I'm founder of Wall Street Mastermind. I am really excited today to be back with another client interview for you guys. Today, we have Aurora on with us, who is actually one of our first clients from Europe, from the UK, where she recruited for London. And so I'm really excited to get her to come on here and talk to you guys about her experience because, we often get a lot of questions about from European students or people in the UK about whether we can actually help them. And I thought, hey, what better way than for you guys to hear from someone who actually just went through the UK recruiting process, right? So, Aurora, I want to thank you for taking the time to come on here and talk to us today.
Thank you.
And so, yeah, absolutely. So, to start, if you can maybe just introduce yourself a little bit so people kind of get a sense for who you are as a candidate, or what is your profile exactly, so they can kind of see.
Sure. So I have just finished my second year studying economics with French and German at the University of Sheffield in the UK. I have been interested in investment banking ever since the start of my first year, when I got involved in the Sheffield Investment Society, and I realized that banking was what I wanted to do.
Wow.
So I started thinking about applying to investment banking, and that's when I came across Wall Street Mastermind.
Got it. Okay. And just like for our listeners who maybe aren't as familiar with the UK recruiting landscape,
Mhm.
would you say Sheffield is considered a target school in Europe, or semi-target, or non-target? Like how?
Absolutely non-target.
Absolutely.
I when I was looking at people from my university on LinkedIn who were in investment banking, and I typed in, when it shows you the filters.
Yeah.
I put my university in, and I could find maybe 5 people. So non-target.
Okay.
My hopes were very, very low.
Got it. Okay. So you did a search on alumni on LinkedIn. You found 5 people who have broken it, and that's 5 people in the last year or ever, like
Uh,
overall.
ever
Ever. Okay.
overall.
Okay. Got it. So
Yeah.
you guys are a non-target school. Because I think the target schools in the UK are like LSE and Oxford and
Yeah.
Cambridge and
Yeah.
LBS and stuff like that, right? And
Hmm.
maybe
Hmm.
like the next tier would be, UCL and Durham,
Imperial.
Warwick and Imperial and those types of
Yeah.
schools, right?
The ones, yeah.
So if you're not at a school like that, then I imagine it's pretty tough. You mentioned that you wanted to, and like, would you say like your grades in school are pretty good, or were they okay, above average? Like, how would you kind of characterize that?
My grades were pretty good.
Okay.
Um, the only reason why I went to Sheffield is because there were only a set of universities in the UK who did the course that I wanted to do, so economics with languages.
Mhm.
So there were about 5 universities, and Sheffield was supposed to be the the last resort, but then I ended up there, and I don't regret my choice. But when I went into Sheffield, I was a bit upset about the career opportunities that would have been available to me, because the universities that are ranked the highest are usually the ones that have the most funding, which
Right.
means that you get the highest amount of people who can help you, and the highest amount of alumni who are um, in the professions that are the highest paid.
Right. So you knew you wanted to go into banking since your first year. And
Yeah.
so what was that recruiting process like for you? Or not the recruiting process, but the preparation process. I'm sure you started thinking about like, hey, what do I have to do to get in from a school like Sheffield? So talk to us a little bit about what life was like before Wall Street Mastermind, or like what were you doing on your own, and what were the things that you were kind of struggling with?
Mhm. So my course is a 4-year course, and that means that in the UK, you have something like spring weeks, which are 1 week internships that you usually do in your first year,
Yeah.
and that those give you an overview of the bank, the divisions of the bank,
Yep.
and at the end of them you usually interview, and the majority of students who go to spring weeks, they can convert the spring week into a summer internship, so that they don't have to go through the whole application process again.
Right.
So in the beginning of my first year, I applied to spring weeks, but I wasn't successful. That wasn't because my CV was bad, even though I thought it was. It was because I wasn't actually eligible to apply for spring weeks, because I applied in the first year of a 4-year course.
Mm.
So I had practice, obviously, writing my CV and writing the cover letter. And when I started my second year, and when I was actually eligible to apply for spring weeks, my imposter syndrome was so bad that I actually applied for like 3 or 4, and that's it.
Mm.
Because that was before Wall Street Mastermind. So I had no clear idea of how to go about it.
Mm.
I wasn't even sure if my CV and my cover letter were good enough,
Mm.
because I had asked other people to check it, but obviously they are not professionals. They are not. They don't know really. They don't have a clear idea of what are the right things to put in the CV and in the cover letter, and what are the right things to say in an interview. But luckily, I joined Wall Street Mastermind this is back in February.
Yeah.
And by that time, I had applied for the Deutsche Bank Spring Week, but I hadn't had the interview yet.
Mm.
So I applied for the Wall Street Mastermind about 1 week before my phone interview. Um, you gave me the questionnaire, the behavioral questionnaire. So I went through all the behavioral videos in that week,
Mhm.
trying to follow trying to do what you said would be the best answers.
Yeah.
And then I just did the phone interview, and I got lucky because that was successful.
Yeah. Got it. So yeah, I remember you joined back in like end of January, early February. And
Yeah.
so, it's end of July now. So it's been like exactly 6 months actually since you joined.
Mhm. Yeah.
So a lot has happened in the last 6 months or so. So just to clarify something though, you said 4-year program. Typically, uh, universities in the UK are 3 years, right? But you're saying your university is a 4-year program.
Yes, because I'm studying languages, so there's a year abroad.
Got it. Okay. So just in case some of our listeners are confused, that's why that's 4 years. And so now you just finished, I guess, the second year out of the 4 years, basically,
Yeah.
which
Yeah.
for most people will be the equivalent of the first year, right? Like you
Yeah.
just finished what would be first year for most people if they're
Mhm.
going to a 3-year program. Okay, got it. So you came into this program, like what would you say, because again, the number one question that we get from all the European students that somehow find us, we don't really do much marketing in Europe, to be honest, because we're based here in US, and the US is a huge market as is, and we kind of have our hands full with all the US
Mhm.
clients. But sometimes the European clients will find us on their own, and they'll be really interested in potentially working with us, but then they'll kind of wonder like, well, I know you're getting all these amazing results for US students, but can you actually really do that for me if I'm in the UK? Like, isn't it very, very different? Like, what would you what would you say to people who have that question, I guess? Like, what was the process like in the UK, and what do we do inside of the program that you feel like actually helped you with that process? Like, was this stuff that you actually couldn't have? Like, why couldn't you just do this on your own, or why couldn't you just, I don't know, go do some research online and
Yeah.
maybe Google some stuff or watch videos on YouTube, or like, what would you say about that?
So I had the same doubts as everyone has, especially the people from Europe and the UK. And I actually messaged someone from Wall Street Mastermind, one of your colleagues, and she just reassured me that you have some knowledge of the UK recruiting process, and I just took a leap of faith actually. I I wasn't, apart from the testimonials that I had watched on your website, I wasn't really sure what to expect, but my desire to get into investment banking was higher than the potential failure of disappointment that I could have faced if I'd gotten into the program and then found out that you couldn't have helped me like you did with US students. I'd say that it exceeded all my expectations. The kind of support that I got was amazing, and it surely is value for money, because yes, it's a huge investment, or at least it was for me, but it pays off, and it will pay off significantly over the coming years. I mean, yes, you can go online, you can try to find this sort of stuff, but only by watching your videos, your videos are enough value for money. Like, you could spend, I spent it was £6,000, and I would have been happy paying those £6,000 for your videos alone, because they were just like they were so good, and I learned all the technicals just by watching your videos. um, you explained them in such a clear manner that it was impossible not to understand. Obviously, I had to Google some definitions, I had to do my own research, but it wasn't that much, because it was just, the structure was so clear.
Yeah.
And it was helpful in my interview as well, because most of the technical questions in my interviews asked me to not only give an equation for like CAPM and the WAC, but also explaining it conceptually. And I just used what you said in the videos. I couldn't attend the office hours, so I just watched the recordings, because they were at 3 a.m. my time,
Yeah.
but those were really helpful as well.
Yeah, got it. Okay, so you actually did watch the recordings of those office hours, which is great because sometimes they send out those recordings afterwards for the people who can't attend the office hours, and I never know if they actually watch it or not. So it's actually good that you actually watched it. Um, I guess in this decision making process, it sounded like you knew you wanted to get some help because you had tried to do this. You didn't get the results that you wanted on your own. You also go to a school that probably doesn't really have that many people, if anyone, who can help you because no one there is
No one,
investment
no
banking.
one. There was one person who graduated in 2018,
Yeah.
who is now at Lazard, I think. But
Mm.
that he was the only one, but I couldn't ask him to spend much time
Right.
mentoring me, because obviously he's busy.
Right. Yeah. That no, and that's a great point. Is that a lot of the bankers, even if you have some sort of loose connection with them, like you went to the same school or they're alumni,
Mhm.
um, their job is not to help you get a job, right? Like
Yeah,
unless
yeah,
you're their sister or daughter or something like.
yeah.
Most people are very busy. But I guess you knew you needed help. Why find like a US based company like Wall Street Management? Because I'm sure there are plenty of UK services that are, at least from the outside looking in, that
Hmm.
are seemingly very similar to ours. I know that once people have been on the inside of our program, they know that there's probably no other program that's really like this, to be honest. At least like in terms of the level of support, right? But at least from the outside looking in, I'm just trying to put myself in your shoes. Or I'm trying to put myself in the shoes of a lot of the other European students. Like they're probably thinking, well, I'm just gonna go with this other company in the UK because they're in the UK, right? Did you consider some of those other companies or not really?
Um, I did, but I had been a subscriber of your newsletter for about a year at that time.
Oh wow.
And one of the reasons why I decided to go with you was because I I remember in one of your emails, you said that there's a difference between people who are successful and the people who are not, and the people who are successful um, tend to be braver and to, in the sense that they invest in themselves more, even though that investment could seem huge at that time. They know that it will pay off eventually.
Yeah.
There was one email that after reading it, I said, I'm sorry, but I have to go with him. There's no there's no other um there's no other alternative, especially because, as you said, the support is, I'm not gonna say 24/7,
Right.
but you know that there will be someone replying to you within an hour's time. And that's what I needed.
Yeah, I mean that's something that we really pride ourselves on is just the level of responsiveness, right? I mean, even though you're across the pond in a totally different time zone, like we always try to make it a point to get back to every single client as quickly as possible. And the only way to do that is not like, hey, you can only talk to us at a fixed time every week at this time. Like we do have stuff like that too at office hours where you can come and ask questions like we mentioned earlier. But the way we do it is you can send us a Slack message anytime
Mm-hmm.
you have a question. It's just like texting a friend. And that allows us to get back to you super quickly. It's not like, oh, let me email Sam and maybe I'll hear back in 3 days.
Yeah.
Sometimes the way that recruiting happens, everything's happening so fast, you don't have time to wait 2 or 3 days for a response, right? To your
Mm-hmm.
point earlier, like you found out you had an interview in a week as soon as you joined the program. If we wasted 2 or 3 days just to, get you started on whatever it is you needed to do, that's a lot of precious time that you would have missed out on, right? And we probably
Yeah.
needed every single second of that time to really prepare, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, so that's great. That's awesome. I'm glad. I got to go back and look up what I said in that email because this sounds like a great email. I've written so many emails. I don't remember what I said in all of them, but I absolutely that sounds like something that I would have said. So that's pretty funny. I guess the other question that I have for you then is like, can you can you talk about the UK recruiting process because
Mhm.
um, people wonder like, hey, how different is it from the US, right? So to me, when it comes to getting a job in investment banking, really there's only two challenges that you have to overcome. One, you have to figure out how you can get selected for interviews in the first place, right?
Yeah.
Two, if you can get the interviews, you have to figure out what you have to do, like how to prepare so that you can pass those interviews. That's
Mm-hmm.
it, right? There's really only like if I really dumb it down, it's just those two things.
Yeah, literally, yes.
And so if we talk about getting the interview first, I know in the US, like there's two parts. It's like your CV needs to be as good as possible, right? You need
Mm-hmm.
to have relevant experiences and extracurricular activities and good grades in school. And ideally you go to a target school, although in your case, you went to a total non-target school, which that brings me to the second point, which is in the US, we're really, really big on networking here, right? Like anyone who wants to apply has to network really, really hard with as many investment bankers as possible and hope that those bankers will like them enough to then basically help them get the interview, right?
Mm-hmm.
What I've learned from speaking to multiple students in Europe is that networking is not as big of a thing in Europe, right?
Yeah.
Did you
Yeah.
find that to be true or did you network at all or not really? Like was it necessary?
I did, but I networked because I wanted to have a I wanted to know as much about investment banking as I could, and especially at before applying to the Deutsche Bank Spring Week, I wanted to learn as much as possible about the culture there.
Yeah.
It wasn't because I wanted to get a referral, sorry, because referrals are not a thing here.
Yeah.
I mean, unless there's some kind of nepotism going on, it's not the referrals are not a thing, no.
Right. Yeah. So you networked with a different intention. You networked more so just to like genuinely learn about the industry,
Yeah.
learn about the job. Um, and so obviously we have like an entire networking module, which is more tailored to the American students.
Mhm.
Did that help at all with your networking efforts in terms of like how to reach out to the bankers and have those conversations and getting them to talk to you? Or was that like not really that applicable?
It did, but I wasn't prioritizing that
Right.
because I had the behaviorals and the technicals to think about. So that was, I kind of put it to the side and decided to focus more on the other stuff. Yeah, the other parts of the application process.
Yeah, especially since you came into the program and you knew right away you had that interview, so
Yeah,
everything was
yeah,
going into preparing for that interview. Sounds like
yeah.
cool.
Mm-hmm.
That makes sense. So then let's talk about the interview process in
Mm-hmm.
Europe because I know that the interview process in Europe is also there's a lot of overlaps with the US, but there are also some slight differences, not in terms of like the questions they ask you because investment banking is investment banking, right? Like they're gonna ask you the
The
same
same
technical
questions. Yeah.
questions and the same behavioral questions. But I know that from a format standpoint, the format might be slightly different, right? So can you kind of like walk our listeners through what are all the different rounds or steps that you have to go through from beginning to the end?
Mm-hmm. So I can only speak for myself for the kind of interview experience that I had at Deutsche Bank.
Yeah.
The first interview was a phone call with HR. It lasted about half an hour, 45 minutes, and that was all behaviorals. So the typical kind of questions like, tell me about yourself, why Deutsche Bank, why investment banking, tell me about a time when you demonstrated leadership, blah blah blah. Those that kind of stuff.
Yep.
Then when I did that um, and I got in, I basically did the spring week. So it was 3 weeks of networking, presentations about the divisions, and what else? Yeah, this kind of stuff. And then I was selected for the assessment center. The assessment center is basically a super day in the US.
Yep.
That consisted of 3 interviews of half an hour each. There was a case study, the technical interview, and the behavioral one. Um, and funny thing is that when I got the phone call from HR telling me that I had gotten the summer internship, the HR lady said that she remembered interviewing me for the spring week
Oh.
back in February. And she said that I was, she said that I was brilliant. And I immediately thought, well, that's just because I followed Sam's steps. That's it.
Got it. Okay. So it sounds like to get into the spring week is fully behavioral. It's one interview with HR that
Mhm.
decides whether you get in or not. It sounds like you totally crushed that interview and to the point where she
It
still
seems
remembers
so.
you, which is great. Then you go to the spring week itself, which is a 3 week process, lots of networking, learning about the bank, so on and so forth.
Mhm.
And then from the spring week, does everyone at spring week get that next interview or only the people that they really like?
I think they're selective. I think it's only the people that stand out during the spring week, those that participate the most, that ask not only the most amount of questions, but also the questions that are um, the best questions, basically.
Right. Yep. So that's kind of what I think too. And so it's definitely selective. And so you do well at the spring week, you get the
Mhm.
interview, then like you said, you guys call it assessment center. We
Yeah,
call it a super day. But really it's kind of the same thing,
it's
just
the
with
same thing. Yeah,
right?
yeah.
3 30-minute interviews,
Hmm.
behavioral interview, technical interview, case study interview. Let's talk about the case study interview for a second because like what people want to hear a case study interview, they usually kind of get stressed out. They're like, oh, what's a case study interview? Like, what do I have to do? that's also typically the one interview that you can't really just like memorize a bunch of stuff and prepare for that way, right? Like it's not like, oh, what is the formula for discounted cash flow? That's not what
Yeah,
they're asking you to do.
yeah.
So can you kind of tell our listeners a little bit like what is a case study interview? For example, what did they ask you, and how do you go about preparing for that kind of stuff?
So you cannot prepare for that kind of stuff. The best kind of preparation that I found, in my humble opinion, was um, reading the Financial Times, staying on top of the news, and making sure that you know what's happening in the world. But I think the what they're looking for is seeing how you think, and they don't really care about you getting to the right answer. They want to see the kind of steps that you took to get to an answer.
Yeah.
And whether or not that's the right one, I don't think it's of much importance. They mainly want to see if you can think logically,
Yeah.
and if you can reason out loud.
Yeah.
I was asked the question that I was asked was, imagine if you're an entrepreneur looking to buy a supermarket chain, what are the kind of steps that you take to assess whether or not to buy this supermarket chain?
Mm.
So um, they had said that there wouldn't be any kind of technical knowledge involved in the case study interview, but I actually used most of the stuff that I um, I encountered in the technical module. Yeah, I
Oh,
talked about margins, how much the company is growing, that kind of stuff.
yeah. Got it. Okay. And that actually probably is part of what made you stand out is because
Mhm.
honestly, I think what a case study question is, and the reason why it stresses people out so much is because you're being asked to actually have application knowledge, right?
Yeah.
What I mean by application knowledge is you're not just memorizing a bunch of facts, you're not just
Mhm.
memorizing a bunch of numbers or formulas. You're taking you're first developing a conceptual level understanding
Mhm.
about business and finance in general, and
Mhm.
then it doesn't matter what they throw at you, you are applying that knowledge on the spot
Yeah.
and showing them how you think, right?
Yeah.
And to your point, is like in real life, I mean, this is honestly what you're doing in real life on the job. That's why it's hard, right? But in real life, when a banker is assessing or helping their client assess whether company A should acquire company B, those realistically speaking, of course there's a technical component to it, right? Like
Yeah.
of course you're going to look at the financial profile of the business. Of course you're going to think about their growth, you're going to think about their margins, you're going to think about the valuation. Are they asking for too much, like more than what they're worth? Are they overvalued, undervalued? Like those are all things that you have to take into account. But to even be able to speak about stuff like that, you
Mhm.
need to have like an actual conceptual understanding of the underlying concepts, whether it's accounting, whether it's valuation, whether it's M&A or leverage buyouts, like whatever it may be. Um, or else like it's like asking, I just had a newborn. It's like asking a baby to run before they even know how to walk. Like it wouldn't work. Right.
Yeah. Mhm.
Um, but I think the problem is, and the other reason why people are so stressed out about case study questions is most of the time nowadays when people prepare for interviews, what they're doing is they grab one of the really popular interview guides. There's probably two or three guides that everybody's using out there, and there's 400 questions in there. There's answers to those questions, and you just kind of
Mhm.
memorize it.
Yeah.
And then you hope that your interviewer asks you the exact same questions that you already memorized, when in reality, that's not what they're going to do.
Mhm. Mhm.
They're not going to ask you like, banks are getting more sophisticated with how they interview people. They're asking more of these application type questions to see like, not only can you memorize this stuff, but do you actually understand how to apply it?
Mhm.
And so I feel like that's why we put so much emphasis in our program. Like you talked about our technical modules. We don't make you memorize anything in our module, right? Everything is kind of
Uh,
like just lecture style, explaining each concept to you conceptually,
Yeah.
um, as if you're a sixth grader.
Yeah.
If you had to explain this to your little brother, like how would you do it? Right.
Yeah.
That's kind of how we try to teach these things. And the way you can know if, in my opinion, the way you can know if you're actually prepared for this stuff is if you can actually teach this stuff to other people, right?
Hmm.
Like if you can turn around and explain this stuff to your friend or to your parents or whoever, someone who's totally new to finance, then you know you truly understand the stuff inside out, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
Um, do you so the case study question, obviously that one's, I would say, it's probably the hardest part of the interview. I don't know if you agree with that, right?
Hmm. It
Uh,
was.
and then on the behavioral and technical side, obviously behavioral side, it's more of the same versus that first interview you had for
Hmm.
spring week, right? There's only so many behavioral questions they can really ask you, but it's more about like what would you say really like that comment you got from HR saying, that you just completely stood out and made you so memorable to her. Like, what do you think it was about your answers? I mean, I know you said, hey, you just copied our frameworks or whatever, but I think you're giving yourself too little credit. Like, what how did your answer, let me ask it this way, how did your answers actually change before versus after Wall Street Mastermind? Because I feel like on the behavioral side,
Hmm.
most people usually think, hey, my behaviors are pretty good. Like,
Hmm.
you just asked me to talk about myself, right? I know how to do that, right? So I don't really need help on the behaviorals. I know how to talk about my resume and what I've done in the past. I
Yeah.
know how to talk about it. So like, what is the difference actually, or is there a difference?
Um. So before watching your videos, my answer was good, I would say. It was personal. Um, my answer was I want to go into investment banking because I attended one of the lowest performing secondary schools in a low performing secondary school in one of the poorest boroughs in London. So I was surrounded by people who did not aim high, they were not ambitious, and this made me eager to enter a career that would be impactful and where I could contribute a lot.
Mm,
That was my answer before. Um, and after watching your videos, I made it much more structured.
mm,
And I think I added more color to it. I talked about how investment banking can be impactful and the learning opportunity associated with this kind of career. And I think that added a little bit more flavor, I would say. Um, and yeah, I think I like the fact that you told us to give 3 reasons why we wanted to go into investment banking and also why we wanted to go into the specific bank, because most people gave only one,
mm.
and maybe HR thinks, oh, that's not enough.
Right. Yeah, I think you bring up a really good point there, which is you already had a story that you wanted to use, which most people do, right? Because if I say, tell me about yourself, or like, what is your motivation for wanting to do banking, so on and so forth, like you should have some sort of answer or some sort
Yeah.
of story. So our approach is not to change your story, where a lot of times people think like with behavioral questions, there's like a right answer and wrong. There isn't, right? Like everyone's story is different. You got to be genuine and true to yourself. But it's more about like, how do you take that story and structure it in a way so that you're positioning yourself in the most interesting way possible, right?
Hmm.
Like you
Hmm.
said, I think that's what you mean by adding more flavor to it. Uh,
Yeah.
is like we didn't change the example, but two different people can try to use the exact same story and can deliver it in a totally different way,
Hmm.
where one sounds really compelling and the other one doesn't, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think like knowing how to take that same story and dress it up and make it more compelling, that honestly is not rocket science, but at the same time, it just comes from experience, right?
Yeah.
It's like most students haven't done that many behavioral interviews before. And
Hmm.
most students certainly haven't been on the other side of the interviewing table, and
Hmm.
they haven't been the interviewer, and they don't really know like what the interviewer wants to hear or is looking for, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And so I think where we come in is just like, I mean, we literally, like you said, within that week, you send us your answers. We help you kind of rewrite a lot of them. It's still your answers. You have to take the first crack at it, but it's just like us helping you make improvements around the edges
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
make it even
Yeah.
more polished, right?
Yeah.
And
And
people
one
think like, yeah, no, go ahead.
sorry, one point that you said about students not doing many behavioral interviews, they they could do behavioral interviews. I saw that what before Wall Street Mastermind, when I was applying, there were loads of universities doing behavioral interview practice,
Yeah,
but this would be with people who were going to that university and who had done summer internships, and then they had gotten a return offer.
yeah,
But those people are not HR. Those people have not gone through it. So you might very well practice with them, but obviously they might not be able to tell you whether or not your behavioral answer is good enough to go into the next step, to
right.
progress into the next step.
I think what I found with like practicing behavioral interviews is like you should practice as much as you can with as many people as you can. But a
Mhm.
lot of the times, the feedback that you get from people is going to be somewhat superficial, right? Like they'll give
Yeah.
you like little things here and there. Uh,
Mhm.
and also, like a lot of times, that person's opinion might actually be that, hey, your answer is quite good. But
Mhm.
how experienced is that person, or how many people has that person interviewed? Because at the end of the day, on the behavioral side, it's not you're not being graded on an absolute basis. You're being graded on a relative basis versus your
Mhm.
competition.
Mhm.
And unless the person who's giving you feedback has seen a lot of your competition and how they answer these questions, it's actually really, really difficult to accurately benchmark how you stack up against everyone else, right?
Yeah.
Like the
Yeah.
HR lady that interviews you, she's probably interviewed, you know, God knows how many candidates. And so when she says, wow, you're really memorable, she's comparing you against all these
Everyone
other students that she talked to, right? And I guarantee you, she doesn't remember every single student she's ever talked to because she talks to so many of them, right?
else.
But you need someone with that level of experience and who's going to actually take the time to really take a fine comb through all of your answers as opposed to just giving you like high level
Mhm.
30,000 foot feedback like, oh, this answer needs to be a little bit more specific. Okay, like
Yeah.
how,
Yeah.
right? Or what does that mean, right?
Mhm.
Or oh, I think like you need to use a better example here. Okay, but this is the best example I could think of. That's why I'm using it. So like, what would be a better example, right? And so it's like you need to make sure that the feedback that you're getting is actually specific and actionable.
And
Well,
tailored to me. Yeah.
yeah, and it's tailored to you and allows you to stay true to yourself, or
Mhm.
else it's not going to be very useful, right?
Mhm.
Um, so that's on the behavioral side, and then like on the technical side. I mean, you kind of talked about this, but you said that you just kind of used everything from our videos. Had you tried learning technicals like a different way prior to this, or was this pretty much like kind of just how you did it from the get go?
I tried to use the guides like Wall Street Oasis that I found on the internet, but as you said before, those guides teach you to memorize things. They
Yeah,
don't teach you to think about those things by yourself.
yeah,
And that's not how I learned, so I couldn't really take anything out of them.
right, yeah. And that's not how most people learn, to be honest,
Mhm.
because like we're not robots. You don't just feed us a bunch of information and then we just like
Mhm.
memorize it. We have to like really conceptually understand it and have that light bulb moment go off, right? I think the other thing that's really unique about the way we teach technicals is that we don't do any financial modeling, right?
Yeah.
Did you like you never had to touch a single financial model, right? Throughout,
No, because it was not needed. You don't need that to excel at interviews and to get the summer internship offer. You can think about that before starting the job. You can find some courses online that are for free, but
yeah.
you don't actually need to do any financial modeling beforehand.
And that's the point I want to bring up is like a lot of people think like, okay, well, what's the difference between you guys and all the other programs. There's so many programs now out there that are focused on teaching you how to build financial models. There's
Mhm,
nothing wrong with that. It's a really useful skill. But I think what most people don't realize is that learning how to get the job versus learning how to do the job is actually two different skills, right? And a lot of people are kind of like putting the cart before the horse and learning how to do the
yeah,
job by trying to learn how to financial model and whatnot. But in an interview, they're never going to ask you to build a financial model. What they
mhm,
want to know is, can you verbalize these concepts in a
mhm,
clear and articulate manner? And if all you're doing is moving around in an Excel spreadsheet all the time, trying to figure out the Excel formulas and how do I link this to that and whatever, like you're not
mhm,
actually practicing the thing that you need to do to get the job in the first place,
yeah. That's
right?
what the bank's training is all about. They would teach you that stuff. You don't need to think about it.
Yeah, exactly. And I don't know why this industry, by industry, I mean like the investment banking recruiting prep
Mhm,
industry. I don't know why this recruiting prep industry at some point became this huge thing about financial modeling. I
mhm,
think that is because financial modeling is easier to teach because it's just like, hey, well, let's record one financial modeling course one time. It never has to change. And then just like people
yeah.
just watch this, right?
Mhm,
But that serves the companies that are selling this. It doesn't really serve you as the candidate who just needs to be able to pass the interview.
mhm,
Right? So
mhm,
again, I'm not saying don't ever take financial modeling courses, but I'm just saying spend your time on the right things. There's already so little time for you to prepare and do all the things you need to do to get these jobs. You got to
mhm,
focus 100% on getting the job first. And then once you get the job, then go back. Like now that you have the job, I saw you ask a question in Slack, like, what are the things I can do before I start my internship to make sure I prepare for that? Now would be the right time for you to start thinking about stuff like financial modeling
mhm,
and
mhm.
learning how to do PowerPoint and all of those things, right?
Yeah.
Um, cool. So we only have a couple minutes left here, but I guess like just to wrap it up. So obviously, people already know. Ultimately, the outcome you got was you ended up at Deutsche Bank, right? Was that like how do you feel about that outcome? Like where was Deutsche Bank on your list of, I guess, preferred banks or ideal outcomes? Like was it pretty high up there, or like how did you feel about the result?
It was very, very high up in my list. I didn't have a specific top five or top 10.
Yeah,
I just wanted to get into a good and renowned bank.
yeah,
And I think I was even happier. I'm even happier now that I did the spring week and I saw the culture there because it's amazing.
yeah.
I think I love it, so I'm very, very happy. Yeah.
That's awesome. And we were talking about this before this interview, but like you then obviously told your parents about the outcome and like how did your
Mhm.
parents feel about it? Because obviously they played a big part in supporting you with the investment into this program, right? And so what was their reaction when they found out that you got this job?
So most of the money came from my dad. My dad is the sole earner in the family because my mom is still learning English, so she's not working right now.
Yeah.
And I actually, before joining, I felt bad about asking him to take such a huge investment because um, I wasn't sure of my abilities, and imposter syndrome started to kick in and started to say, no, but you'll never get in, so don't even bother doing it.
Mm.
And then I just took a leap of faith in myself, and he was so he's there.
Uh-oh.
When I got the offer, I told them it was money well spent. It was such a good investment, and they both agreed. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, you kind of froze up a little bit there for a second, but I think if we can rewind maybe like just 10
Mm-hmm.
20 seconds. So
Mm-hmm.
you had imposter syndrome. You felt bad about asking him for all this money.
Yeah.
And then what happened after that?
And then they are incredibly supportive, so I knew that they wouldn't say no, but I still felt bad about it. And then when they agreed, I just worked as hard as as I could to get the offer, and then when I got the offer, I told them that it was money well spent.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, when your parents are so supportive of your career and your ambitions, and they make the type of investment that they made in this program, you're not going to let that go to waste, right?
Yeah,
It's almost
yeah.
like now you have to work even harder to make
Hmm.
sure that you don't let not only not let yourself down, but you don't let your parents down as well,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
So that's awesome, and I'm glad that they're so supportive. Um, Last question for you before we run out of time, like if you
Mhm,
could give just one piece of advice to maybe other students who are in Europe right now and they're just
mhm.
starting to kind of to go on this journey of recruiting for investment banking, like what's something that you wish you had known back when you first started that would have maybe saved you a lot of time or a lot of effort and just made things easier for you? Like, is there anything that you learned in hindsight that you wish you knew back then?
Um, One thing that I would say is that investment banking is so competitive that you could very well do it by yourself, but you need you need an expert, you need someone who's been there, you need someone who can guide you through it, not only because it's so competitive, but also because it can take a toll on your mental health, and it can get hard sometimes, it can get difficult. So you need that community, not only from your coach, but also from other applicants who are going through the same thing. And the Wall Street Mastermind community has been so incredibly supportive. They're just there anytime you need something. I could just type a question on Slack and I knew that someone would get back to me within an hour. So that was, you need that kind of stuff. Otherwise, you feel like you're just alone and you're just doing it, and it's you against thousands of applicants.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I mean, I think the way to think about it is like you can never have too much help when it comes
Hmm.
to something like as competitive as this. Like the top firms, like a Deutsche Bank, they accept like less than 1% of their applicants every year, right? Like
Hmm.
that's how competitive it is. Um, and honestly, like look, if someone like you, obviously you're a great candidate, but like someone on you, like you, who goes to, a total non-target school, who typically doesn't place anyone into banking, and
Yeah,
even the ones who do get into banking, they might not be at the top banks. But
yeah.
if someone like you could get in from Sheffield, like there's really no excuse, right?
Hmm.
It's just a matter of like being willing to put in the work to work
Hmm.
hard. Obviously you have to have a good work ethic or you're not cut out for this job. uh,
Hmm.
is being willing to invest in yourself, right, and put some skin in the game and basically make it so that failure is not an option, and then
Yeah.
like basically just even fighting off the imposter syndrome that you or the self-doubt that you might have in your head
Hmm.
and getting the support system that you need.
Hmm.
Right, because if you can get the right support system and you have the work ethic, I really believe that those are the two most important ingredients for anyone to be successful. Right?
Hmm.
There's no reason why you can't do this. Or if you're telling yourself you can't do this, I would reframe that question and ask yourself, not I can't do this, but how can I do this?
Hmm.
What can I do to make this happen? Right. And so with that said, guys, if you're still listening to this and this any of this resonates with you at all, maybe you're just starting out your recruiting process in Europe and you want to become an investment banker, but you know how competitive it is out there. I want to invite you to reach out to our team. You can schedule a free strategy session, completely free, just to have like a quick 30 to 45-minute conversation with us to see if or how we might even be able to help you, right? We need to ask you some questions to learn more about your exact situation because every single person is different, right? Um, what are your goals? What kind of banks are you aiming for? What are you struggling with? Where do you feel like is going to potentially prevent you from getting to the outcome that you want? And based on that, we can if we can help you, we'll customize something for you that makes sense for you because everything we do is kind of like it's one-on-one, right? But if it doesn't make sense or we don't think that we can actually help you, we'll be very honest and tell you like, hey, I don't think we're the best fit. But even in that case, we'll at a minimum just give you some advice on what we think we would do if we were in your shoes. And you can take that advice and you can go out and implement it on your own and probably still be better off than you started, right? So again, this call is absolutely free. If you're interested in booking this call, you can go to www.wallstreetmastermind.com/apply. The street's abbreviated to ST, so it's wallstmastermind.com/apply. And we look forward to talking to you. Okay, so Aurora, I want to thank you again for taking so much time to talk to us today and sharing your experience with everyone. I think this is invaluable for our listeners. Hopefully, I know I certainly also learned some things as well about the European recruiting process. And it was truly an honor to work with you and just see the way that you really put in the work and came out the other side and got the outcome that you wanted, right? And even you taking a leap of faith and putting your trust in our program to guide you through this process, that means a lot to us. And so we look forward to seeing all the success that you have in the future going forward. And obviously, even though you have a job now, you're always going to be a part of the Wall Street Mastermind family. So don't be a stranger. If there's anything else that we can help you with, just let us know. Hit us up on Slack, and like you said, we'll get back to you as quickly as we can. All right.
Thank you very much.
Yeah,
Thank you.
absolutely. So, guys, that'll be it for today. Thank you guys for tuning in, and we'll be back with more of these for you guys in the future. All right. And that'll be it. Talk soon. Bye.